Welcome back. So, even though there's probably no actual interval in the recording, it can be challenging for me to continue my walk and talk post-meditation because my mind is so different, so not discursive. So since the end of 2018, to return to my other bookmark, I've been chasing a complex mystery. In December of that year, I was gripped with the most intense feeling of imminent doom. And I've felt a few of those feelings. Let me check and make sure this is working properly. We had a little clickiness there. Test. Seems like we're still going. All right, so yeah, never had a feeling like this. Came out of nowhere, probably around December 15th, 16th, 17th, somewhere in there. And lasted for a couple of weeks, maybe a week and a half, something like this. And then there was just as suddenly as it arose, it completely dissipated. And there were 3 days in my life where I felt no anxiety whatsoever. I have no memory of feeling that free of anxiety. Though it is possible that there were times in my childhood like that, perhaps. I wasn't a particularly fearful child. And I woke up one morning with zero anxiety and was like, oh my God, what the hell even is this? Because most of my adult life has been lived with quite a bit of anxiety. So that was very strange. And then about maybe day 3, was probably, I'm going to guess, sometime shortly after Christmas, but I'm not sure of the exact dates. I did not keep records of this. I woke up and there was zero motivation. None. Also an experience I've never had. The Opspini, white-cheeked geese. He looked over at me when I said that word. So it's pretty hard to continue to live with no motivation. Thankfully, the extremity of that only lasted, the most extreme moments of that absence were fairly short-lived. In other words, it tapered into very slight motivation over a short period of time. And then my capacity to sleep was thrown 9 kinds of curveballs, and my dreaming basically stopped as far as I could tell. We can't actually be certain of what's going on with dreaming, but I had no experience of dreaming, and this is extremely uncommon for me. I've always been a vital dreamer. And at the time, I had no idea what to make of this. I entertained various possibilities. I'll not enumerate them here. But the kinds of things that a metaphysical person might suspect or look into, and I looked into some of these. And, some kind of, I thought perhaps my death was imminent. I initially believed that this was very likely to be something personal to me. I had no reason to think it was distributed over any population space. But as time went on, I began to speak to a few people about it. A number of my close friends reported something very similar that relieved me of the concern that this was just me, but introduced other concerns. What the hell is going on? I heard very similar reports, mostly from males. Eventually, I talked to people who did not know me at the time, just in case I was somehow had a causal role in the situation, which I did not suspect, but I conceived it as possible. And over time, particularly as I spoke about it in some of my walk and talks, other people contacted me and they were like, yeah, something happened, dude. I don't know what the fuck is going on. It never stopped. It transformed over time, but it never stopped. And I had suspicions about what might be causing it. I'm very sensitive and think in extremely complex ways about temporality, time. I can think I can think about time the way humans think about three-dimensional spaces or n-dimensional spaces. And one of my theories at the time was that there was a near-term event in the future that was so profound to our world that it was sending shockwaves backwards in time, right? Retrotemporally. And when you encounter something that you have no experience of, and you don't have other intelligent people to explore it with, most of my friends who were affected were so affected that it primarily deprived them of their minds to some degree, or their motivation and their dreaming and so forth. Right? So they were not particularly curious about it. They were too overwhelmed to be curious. And I was overwhelmed, but wanted to know, what is this about? What does this have to do with? Not necessarily what is happening. That's a dangerous kind of question. But, in situations where the threat floor is high, we want to know something about that. So I kept exploring, and I guess we're, coming up on we're 6 years into this process or something, 7? 8? Yeah, we're closing in on 2028, so that will be 10 years. And also what I discovered is that different people were affected differently, and they were affected in different timelines. Not everyone had the same experience right when I did. If you watch birds, you'll see how populations work, right? There's highly sensitive, there's extremely sensitive birds, there's highly sensitive, moderately insensitive. So you can't, everybody doesn't experience the same thing at the same time unless it's something very, how to put it, very physically obvious, right? So I stayed on the case, and I learned all kinds of impossible things, wildly astonishing to me things, about the necessity of synchronization in biospheres, temporalities, organisms, relationships, and what happens when that starts to degrade. I learned the words Zeitgeber and Zeitstorer from German very serendipitously by picking up a book called something like The Bipolar Survival Guide accidentally one day. Zeitgebers, I get these confused all the time, so I may have them inverted, but Zeitgebers, I think, reduce synchronization, right? They desynchronize temporal and biorelational experience. And Zeitstorers restore it. right? So you've probably heard that if you want to sleep better, get up when the sun rises and spend 15, 20 minutes, half an hour in the sun with a lot of your skin exposed. So this is a Zeitstorer, if I've got the polarity correct. Right, so music, eating at the same time, eating rhythmically, eating with other people, having social engagement, all of these things are Zeitstores. Again, if I've got the polarity right, I'll just stop saying that now. So this went on, and I continued to explore it, mostly alone. I didn't know anyone else who was sort of on the case. I'm going to leave out a lot of the story here. Because mainly I just wanted to frame a brief nutshell of the history for me. And so it's now a long time later, and I'm still on the case. And I've got that weird sort of crime scene chalkboard with images and links and so forth, the octopus of, in my mind. There's no actual physical object like this in my world yet, though that would be fun to do. But I've come to understand, it seems relatively likely that there is an event or a series of events in the near-term future that are sending signals backwards in time. However, time is extremely complex, and it's wildly different anywhere where there are organisms than it is where there are less or fewer organisms. Organisms make forms of time that you can't have without them. It turns out that time and relationship are fundamentally linked, or even generate each other. And one of the reasons why many intelligences might be interested in our world is because of the unique modes of temporality that exist here. I hear this discussed never in the UFO UAP circle. I hear lots of blatant, absurd nonsense from very highly educated, dumb people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and others who make claims that there's nothing interesting here. Why would they come? And I will never get this opportunity, but I would love to rip Tyson a couple of new ones in any form of debate, any day of the week. I'm sure I won't get that opportunity. Tangential topic. So it turns out that temporality is extremely complex. It is not a matter of intervals at all. It's fundamentally a matter of relationships. And there are directions in time that we have no physical analogs for. And temporality, at least on our world, I don't know how I have no direct experience of it on other worlds, though I have some experience of it on other worlds. Time is symphonic. It's a very complex weave of intelligences, character, relationships, and so forth. And I've come to feel very strongly, with relatively high confidence, that something else is going on. And this is the first time that I've articulated it publicly, though I've spoken about it with a few friends. So there are streams in time. And time has a lot of complex resemblances to flows of water. So I now strongly suspect that for my entire life, primary features of local temporality were flowing toward the future. And so my senses, body, mind, heart, intelligences, they were all hitchhiking on this forward flow. Much as a bird might use the direction of the wind by flying into that direction and gaining altitude. And then I think, for me, and obviously for many other human beings, your mileage will vary. We're each uniquely in the situation. In fact, we are modes of time. Much like an incoming tide, right? So just imagine that there's some sort of tidal aspect of time, that my entire life, the tide has been coming in. Yeah? And I am using this unconsciously, without awareness, naturally hitchhiking on it in many aspects of my life and being. And then the tide is all the way in, right? So this would be the end of 2018. Now the tide has stopped flowing in. Since I never think this way, and I have no, I am not conscious of my senses of these aspects of temporality. I have no way to imagine them yet. So I can, at that point, the chances of me stumbling on this idea are very slim. But the process continues. And then the time begins, the temporal flow begins to recede. So this would be as if time is always flowing toward the future in my life, and all kinds of aspects of my biology and mind and so forth are hitchhiking on this flow, and then the flow stops, right? Now I have no idea how to turn around in time if it's going to go the other direction, right? And how to hitchhike that way. At least back then I didn't. And everything, every organism, every mind is a hitchhiker. This is part of why Douglas Adams's books are so profound. I did a lot of hitchhiking as a runaway when I was a teenager. I mean, I guess I caught 1,000 rides or something like this. And 2 of them had bad intentions, maybe 5 of them, or 10, but only 2 of them evinced those intentions. I was able to find my way out of those situations, even though I was quite young at the time. Haha. So in any case, what I now suspect is that a fundamental feature of temporality on our world, and this is probably overdetermined, right? It's not that there's a single cause. Features of time-space, the collapse of our ecologies, transformations in the sun, right? The sun is dragging the world and the solar system through interstellar space. The space is like water, it has character. So it has currents. Yeah? There are so many options for causal phenomena, and it's extremely difficult to do any tests. Right? This is the kind of thing you have to find your way through, just as when you might be lost in a wilderness or in the ocean or something, right? You do these wayfinding behaviors. So I've been doing those sort of temporally now that I've understood that there's a landscape there. And what I think is likely is that a primary feature of time is now flowing backwards toward the past. We have no nomenclature about this in English. I have not even ever heard of anything like this in human speech. Right? I did find a strange Russian scientist who I have the second volume of a book called On the Time Phenomena, who seems to have become very curious that time might be a measurable force and that temporalities might vary. I am certain that temporalities vary. But the moderns don't think this way at all. They think of time as, sort of a mechanical phenomena, the seconds on the clock or so forth. So I've become highly confident that a feature of time is now flowing toward the past that was, for all points, all remembered points in my existence, flowing toward the future. Now, it could be flowing toward things I don't even have names for. It could be flowing in ways I don't have nomenclature about. But something has flipped over, and I sense it. And I can sense it much more clearly now that I have some awareness of it, some way to speak toward it, some consciousness of, some ways of speaking about it, right? Because consciousness, to be conscious of something has different registers, right? There's the sort of, we might imagine the soul register, the spirit register, the mind register, the body register. My body was just talking there. The conceptual register, and then the linguistic register, right? So to be conscious of something, you don't have to have language for it, but you have to be able to conceive of it in some way. And this is often, if one wants to conceive of something, this is often a conceptual thing. I did not have these concepts in the beginning. I had no way to adjudicate them. I'm here visiting one of the elders where I live, so please bear with me for a quiet moment while I greet them. Now you can see that in the beginning I had a strange intuition, right? Something is sending, some part of time is going backwards, but it never occurred to me that there might be a stream of temporality that had been flowing toward the future and was now flowing, then it had paused at the tidal mark, right? And then reversed direction. And this is what I strongly suspect now. So for those of you who may have followed my exploration of this bizarre situation, this is an update on that, and I will continue to delve into these matters. I am profoundly grateful for this time together, for your curiosity, enthusiasm, and attention. For the great family of beings, physical and non, living and dead, unborn, disembodied, more than merely embodied. We keep presuming that embodiment is the good thing, or the best thing. It's a fabulous thing, make no mistake, but yeah, I honor my mentors and scions of beauty and virtue, truth, as a way of being, not as facts. I remember them. I recognize them. I celebrate them. And you, Please take a moment, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, ask a question, share some of your insight or experience, criticize me, whatever you got. Support the channel in whatever way feels natural to you. I wish you beauty, liberation, love, health, well-being, healing, insight, brilliant adventures, wise dreams, amazing companions, and the fulfillment of the promise of your human incarnation.
What'd you got say?
This time around. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Just want to take a moment and honor the brilliant living beings in our world. Space-time, the sun, the moon, the waters, living waters, and all the beings who strive to rescue and sustain and nurture our origin, our being, the animals we are, the organisms we are together. With great reverence and humility. All you beautiful ones, you holy ones, and all your inner forms, we love you, we remember you, we recognize you. So at present I have an unusual situation in which there's so many little bookmarks in my mind that I cannot simply select one. But I'm going to make the attempt nonetheless. So, a couple of things rise to my awareness. And one of those is the subjective-objective dialectic, which I find incredibly troubling. Yes, it is alive. Maybe I'll speak to that first, and then I'll spin back to the second bookmark I have, which is what the flapping slot took place at the end of 2018 in our world. All right, so if you go on Reddit, by all means don't, or if you go on X, avoid that like it's plutonium. Even if you're just doing research, you're going to have to wash your body after an exposure to that fucking nightmare. You may see some bright lights, there are some. But there's a bunch of arguing, and a lot of bullying, and a lot of aggression farming, reaction farming, us and them farming, crude and obvious to anyone who's slightly trained forms of psychological, emotional, situational, and metabolic manipulation, obviously purposeful, obviously technologically enhanceable and enhanced moment to moment, second to second. And essentially you could break this down into, various little branchings, but it has a lot to do with some voice or some bot or whatever claiming I know what's going on and you other people are dumb. Which, if you listen to my channel, you'll find me doing something like that. Something that at least can resemble that, depending on if you're giving it a critical read or a generous read. And this is not merely, well, first of all, this is not an accidental situation by any stretch of the imagination. This is a situation that's being intentionally produced by a number of don't even know what to call them. They're not I guess you could think of them as organizations, but they're actually something weirder because many of their imperatives are to cause disorganization, dissociation, discommunion, disconnection, conflict, pressurizing it, right? Make it pop. So that would be a very strange orientation for any organization that wasn't simply a military organization. And it's the wrong orientation for a military organization. Because what you really want is to not have to fight wars at all. And you want the benefits of communal concern, focus, intelligence, and behavior everywhere you can possibly get them, unless war is your priority, right? Then you get these poisoned, thrisp-like structures in human collective behavior and mentality. And anyone looking at these from the outside would certainly see these not merely as diseases, right? Tragic, avoidable. It's very windy today, so there may be some wind noise. I can't do much about it. You would want to cure them, right? You would want these to go away because, well, for very simple reasons, the planet won't survive them, our species won't survive them. The suffering that they inject into the lives of every living being on Earth, second to second, moment to moment, the amplitude, the ever-rising amplitude of the suffering is tragic, inexplicable, unjust, terrifying, not merely amoral, right, but anti-moral. No concern for the well-being of beings, absolute concern for the sustainment, nurturance, funding, and explosive metastasis of these systems that are dominating our people. And, I'm very concerned with understanding the arcs of the evolution of human cognition and consciousness. And when you study these timelines, when one studies these timelines, using ancient literature and expositions by brilliant minds on these matters, Bruno Snell, Julian Jaynes, to some degree E.A. McGilchrist, Hannah Arendt, Elaine Scarry. Who was the genius woman who wrote that book on the imagination? Can't quite find her name at the moment. But when you get these lenses, right, that open up the landscape of milestones and transformations over time, you can discover astonishing things about these processes and how they developed, evolved, and became dominant in our species. And when you look back into distant history, trying to understand how we got to where we are today, which I am always doing. And I will never stop doing that. I don't think I know, let's be really clear. But it's not just fog there either. Right? You will see effectively three common features. I'm not sure which one to start with, but the capacity to cache, to collect together assets of some kind, leads to transformations in the purposing of memory. And this leads to formal counting and accounting systems. And then, now I'm just focusing on a few of the features here. This leads to representational cognition, where you represent what is absent with tokens. And that becomes a crisis. The admonitions in various religious circles against making images and so forth are an example of humans attempting to respond to this crisis. Why would you worship an object? And there's some very complex history to that as well, because I think for nearly all of human history there was no such thing as an ordinary object. Try to imagine that. There are 0 ordinary objects in your experience. All objects are mysterious. Tools more than any. The relationship between the beginnings of human tool use and fire use and contact with non-human intelligence, these histories are so profound that I'm actually somewhat terrified to even begin to speak of what I've learned of them. So these are some foundational transformations that happened a long time ago, and differently in different places and times in different human cohorts on the face of our world. But at a certain time, a very specific transformation begins to take place, and it's hard to pinpoint precisely where this is. But one of the milestones I'm aware of is Galileo's situation. And this involves something very central to human existence, which is understanding the movements of the skyscape. It's very important to realize that humans never thought that those features of the skyscape are objects. They never thought those were things. That's a pretty recent development. And you can see that once you think the things in the sky are objects, pretty soon everything becomes an object. Right? This is the problem with thingification, in cognition, consciousness, expectation, and so forth.
7 days a week.
And objectification in general, that Ian McGilchrist covers so expertly, if at incredible length, in his 2-volume book, The Matter with Things. But something happens around the time where Galileo gets in trouble. And Owen Barfield speaks very brilliantly about this in Saving the Appearances, a book that I recommend to everyone. One of the most amazing books I've encountered. Do I care if it's true? Not even slightly. Do I care if he's making things up? Not even kind of. Why would I not care that Owen might be making things up? Because Owen forges a series of perspectival lenses that are priceless and have nothing to do with whether he's telling the truth or not. Right? And this gets to the core of the concern that began my present diatribe, which is the concept of objectivity and its bizarre, trenchant placement as opposed to subjectivity. Okay? Love to know how you could possibly oppose objectivity to subjectivity, since necessarily it is subjectivity that determines whether you trust and to what degree you might entertain objectivist models, methods, orientations, values, so forth. So the idea that your subjectivity is just a trivial side branch of experience and only those things that are objectively true can be understood to be true, wow. Every single human being should be absolutely suspicious of this transformation, without exception. This is one of the greatest and weirdest mysteries of our present, wow, what do we even call it? Dumpster fire of threat landscapes, having sex with each other to produce new ones, something like that? Yeah. So, I've said this before, but many people, myself included, prior to encountering Barfield, strongly suspected or believed that Galileo got in trouble for something like claiming that the Earth orbits the sun. This is not what Galileo was in trouble for. Others had made similar claims, probably, or at least had proposed such things, right? Going back at least to Copernicus and probably to the Greeks and before, because one of the things that gave rise to the possibility of objectivity was the endless and ancient fascination with the sky. Now think about this. We modernly call people who study the sky by various scientific names. Generally, it is considered in vogue to poo-poo things like astrology. But the origins of astronomy had nothing to do with the mere measurements of things, though those measurements did occur. And one of the really strange things about astronomy is a single human being does not live long enough to succeed at deep observations of the skyscape. What you need is data over time. You've got to cache that data. And then you have to train, or you have to apprentice, or you have to inspire new generations to continue that process over periods of hundreds or thousands of years. Then you start to get a picture of what's going on in the sky, because the processes in the sky, most of them, moon cycles and sun cycles somewhat accepted, happen over very long periods of time. Yeah. So you need generations of people watching and measuring and thinking about and being concerned with the sky before you can get anything that even resembles astronomy. And astronomy is not what the ancients were doing. I just want to be absolutely clear about that. Yeah, they were not objectivists. Right? They did not believe those were things. They didn't even believe they were beings. Whatever they thought they might be was something that is transcendental to our lexicons entirely, if they thought at all about it. And probably they were so wrapped in relation, so elated in transcendental, experience of these matters, that the idea of reducing them to a book full of measurements would be insane. It would be the thing you would never do. Nonetheless, they made the measurements and established the way of knowing, the ways of knowing associated with the observation of the sky. So, sometime around Galileo, and this is the reason I believe listening to Barfield, that the church became particularly concerned about this. The transformation of the idea of a theory, which for vast epochs, if anything like that even existed, like theoria for the ancient Greeks, and I know there are detractors to this perspective, good for them. Theories were ways of seeing. They were perspectival lenses, and the good ones gave you insight. They were not primarily concerned with whether or not they, quote, saved the appearances, i.e. matched the facts of common human experience, adjudicated by the mob, right? Yeah. Let's see where I'm going to go here. So the problem for the church with Galileo was that he was proposing a new form of truth. And this truth required no belief in anything metaphysical. And this was the genesis of the concept of theories that were effectively equivalent to phenomena. All right, they could predict them, they could explain them. Almost always these are mathematical models. And this is a new form of truth, right? The facts, right? The ability to determine and declare what is the case about some phenomena. Now, this is also very problematical for a crucial reason that is almost always overlooked. And this is the competition between facts and meaning. It can seem almost godlike to be able to predict the movements of phenomena in the sky and the timing of these movements and their transformations. And a central problem here is that wow, how to even frame this? Human cognition has a facet, or developed a facet, that is inclined to displace experiences of meaning, understanding, awareness, relation, participation, communion, intelligence, insight with dead structure. And there is no more powerful dead structure than a mathematically provable theorem. That forces you to believe it. Right? You have a really hard time deciding, nah, that's not really the case. Right? So there's a bunch of trouble here, and it's deep, thick. I don't really have time to get into it, but I just want you to notice that the observation and mapping out of related facts became so compelling that it first began to replace faith, relation, spirit, dreaming, memory, and then began to evict the subjective aspects of human experience from validation. Because we can validate the numbers, but we can't validate the flavor of the peach in your mouth. Subjective is not capturable by explanation. And so these systems developed, particularly focused on this disjunction, in their attempt to eject subjective experience. Anecdotal evidence, they alleged that they saw something in the sky, right? To eject that, to defame it, to claim that it's mere, hallucination, or you're just making things up. By the way, there's nothing you could make up that would be more more deceptive than the idea that subjective experience has no bearing on what is the case. Now, if you're trying to compute the arc and penetration of a bullet, you're mostly right about that. Except that you will need subjective senses to determine whether your methods and models are accurate. So this is like a light bulb attempting to overtake the sun. Because the light bulb can be controlled at will and the sun cannot. This is a very dangerous and lethal situation for our people, for all human beings. And so we have this concept of objectivity. What does this actually mean? Well, it doesn't mean objectivity. This is the first thing we should notice. What objectivity actually means, well, I don't know what it actually means. What objectivity speaks to is a specific array of modes of cognition under which we can determine if there is agreement about facts. Agreement is the key, right? Reproducibility enhances our, confidence in objective findings. Non-reproducibility declines it. Right? So objectivity is supposedly kind of about what everyone would agree upon if they were shown the same data in the same situation. Of course, there are no same situations, and there's no such thing as the same data either, because each mind that interprets data has a unique experience of doing so. So, the whole idea of objectivity is a myth. And, this has to do with the rise of things like logical positivism in maybe the 1920s and 30s, I think. And the belief that we could determine what everything, it's a belief in a mechanical universe. It is a kind of faith, or a very strange form of anti-faith. Let's see here. One moment. This I join with the great world forest, with their origins and purposes, with their allies and companions. So, we inherit the present state of these processes without understanding most of us, without understanding their origins, the imperatives that orient them, and their relationships to caching, to reducing relationships to transactions, and to war. And we've been told a bunch of nonsense about our species, but as regards these matters, nonetheless. Caching leads to representational cognition. Representational cognition likes to preserve only that which it can grasp, or rather has an inclination to do so, we might say. Humans under the influence of representational cognition and specific aspects of it particularly. I remember the moment when I first, having been fascinated by science throughout my life, and not particularly scientistic, it's an incredible and beautiful array of opportunity spaces for human cognition when it is implemented for purposes as beautiful as they are true and accurate. Unfortunately, this almost never happens because the entire field is very thoroughly captured, in my view. So subjectivity got a bad name. And part of the way that happened was there was a new way of knowing that arose, new kid on the block, who had a really big stick. And that stick was proof. And so then there were, I'm trying to collect together something that's like herding 1,900 octopuses. I need a lot of crab meat. So, in these processes as they developed and underwent mutation and became more and more successful, and the more machines we built, the more successful they seemed. Right? These objectivist maps of what is true. And this relates to a serious problem. And the problem has to do with artificially produced objects. So for probably long periods of human history, there were either none or very few artificially produced objects. But if you have a fork, right, a metal fork, you can know most of what is probably important for you as a pragmatic being to know about the fork. But if you compare that to a raccoon, these two things have nearly nothing in common. They're almost the explicit opposite of each other. So objectivity captures the features of the fork very accurately and pseudo-completely. No, we don't know the quantum state of the atoms in the fork or whatever, the molecules, the particles, point particles. But we can know that it's made of a specific mix of metals and so forth, shaped in a certain way by certain processes. It's no problem with the fork. With your raccoon, you're fucked. There's no chance of you getting a grip on that. You might if you're faced with something as complex as a raccoon, you might as well be faced with everything, like the universe. Yes, you can learn the anatomy of the raccoon, you can learn its habits, blah, 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 blah. If you do those things, if you try to learn similar things about me, you're going to miss almost everything about me, especially if we don't converse, if we're not together. And if you're together with a raccoon, it's an entirely different thing from studying one. We should notice this. Thinking about peaches has nothing to do with the flavor you will taste if you bite into one. Concept versus immersion. Yeah. So this is the problem. And the problem is that as fork knowledge became more and more prevalent, more and more authorial or authorized, authoritative, features of human cognition decided that the stuff you couldn't get a clear grip on didn't exist, didn't matter, wasn't important, is all just made up, right? It's anecdotal, bruh. Yeah, you had a dream? No, it's just an anecdote. Hi, boo-boos. Hi.
His name is Benny. He's very fierce, as you can see.
Yes, he is a terrifying creature.
Absolutely.
That was a beautiful little interaction. So, what ended up happening was the universe, existence, minds, bodies, everything. And I'm being very Italian at the moment. I'm going to be hyperbolic. Was cast into the likeness of a fork, and the raccoon was ignored, defamed, lied about, chopped up in little bits and turned into machines, obliterated, poisoned, shot, you name it. Poor raccoons. The problem is that our mind is the raccoon. It's not a fork. It never was. And so there's a bunch of lying and sort of militaristic fictions here, right? Hello, boo-boos. I've got a young, not quite as young as has been, Raven with me here. They know I have peanuts, so it's not too surprising that, they come and want to hang out. The males are also so much more aggressive. It's hard to give the girl a peanut. They usually travel in pairs. Whether these are mated pairs or brother and sister is not particularly clear to me. I'm not actually sure that they never mate with their siblings. I don't know a lot about raven mating behavior, or the corvids in general. I do think that they sometimes mate with their children, especially if they're elderly. So, this subjective-objective dialectic is deceptive as hell. Has nothing to do with reality, everything to do with a specific feature of human cognition that is vulnerable to capture by this, by the power of proofs. Now, it doesn't really help, but I'm just going to say what I've said many times before. 99.999% of existence is inaccessible to proving. So if you're only then concerned with the remnant, and you think that remnant is the only part of existence that matters, right, you will become more blind with every move you make with your mind. Okay? And I can say this with absolute confidence. Do you want to ignore proofs? Absolutely not. Do you want to privilege them as the only reasonable form of knowing? Not even kind of. Yet many do. A commenter on my YouTube channel felt very concerned about my, quote, belief in mindsight. I've experienced mindsight. If I lived on a planet where people only ate rocks, right? It was really hard. They had to carefully crush them and sift the dust, or, they would destroy their teeth chewing small rocks and things. And they ignored fruit, right? Someone who came with stories about peaches would be executed. Okay? But the universe is like peaches. It ain't like rocks. And our expectation space we will not perceive that which we imagine to be impossible. So if we're depending only on proofs and established maps of identity, relation, function, and prediction, we're going to miss everything. And we're going to keep missing it more severely every time we play this game. So, I view the world existence itself almost explicitly the opposite of most of my modern compatriots. I think everything is impossible. And the physical layer imports this impossibility into sustainable, organismal, and biorelational, features, beings, more than beings. So I'm not sitting around waiting for someone to prove mindsight to me. I've seen it done, I've experienced it. It's just like peaches. Right? People can say, like, I don't like peaches. You could say to me, I don't like the idea of mindsight, and I'd be fine. But if you say, like, I'm really concerned that you believe this is happening, I find that, interesting. Possibly even useful. But a bit confused. I think this is backwards. And the fact that we can be tricked, right, it resembles the problem with counterfeit money. Of course, money is fundamentally counterfeit already. But, right, the fact that money can be counterfeited doesn't mean there are no actual dollars. Though, in point of fact, there are no actual dollars. The raven wants more peanuts and I don't have any. So it's like walking with me up the path. I suppose that someone seeing this might think something very unusual. And perhaps the actual situation is vastly more unusual than I imagine. I have good reason to believe it is in almost every case. So I just want to really highlight this bizarre problem around objectivity, subjectivity. Objectivity is really the agreements of the masses, and if the masses are very poorly educated or mostly blind, right, what they're willing to agree to is nothing like a consensus view on the nature of reality. Right? If you take the lowest rung on the ladder of human awareness, or you take a rung that naturally throws away most of what's going on in order to produce, predictable results, this does not inform you about the nature of existence. It informs you about certain mechanical features of special processes that have been carefully dissected, right, and then studied. Yeah? So this is not a guide to what is going on at all. This is a guide to what is not going on. What do I mean by that? I mean, like, once again, you want to study the arc of a bullet, this is going to serve you well. And apparently humans are so enthusiastic about exploding each other that they're going to give up the game just to watch new explosions of people and cities and things. If you have a child, you will understand the difference between subjectivity and objectivity and which one fucking matters. And it isn't the latter. You may teach your child about methods in science and math and language and commerce and economies and so forth, to prepare them to survive in the representational battlefield that the humans have established and been captured by and sustained. But you're going to adore your child, in most cases, and they'll adore you. Exceptions noted. So yeah, this subjectivity, objectivity thing, the agreement of poorly educated people or people who have pre-agreed not to see complex phenomena as existent. This tells you nothing about what the universe is. It tells you a lot about vulnerabilities in human cognition, particularly in our time. I'm going to sit some meditation. I shall return, with any luck, to continue shortly. Stay with me.